modern-day organization does not implement dress codes. They are being descaled, and as I said, they are disproportionately burdensome on not me, but on women and members of the other identity communities.
Is a teacher dress code and a sense of, decorum coming to the Halton District School Board? Maybe. But given how hopelessly woke the HDSB is, nothing is for sure. Here's the latest update pertaining to Busty Lemieux. Earlier this month, HDSB trustees approved a request to Education Director Curtis Innes, he/him, to craft a professionalism policy for teachers, which includes a requirement to, quote, maintain appropriate and professional standards, end quote, of dress in the classroom. The report is due on March 1st. Check out this clip from the January 3rd HDSB meeting.
Trustee Collard, is there a third motion? Yes, there is, and I will read it now. Be it resolved that the director develop a professionalism policy which outlines the HDSB's expectations of all staff members, including the requirement to maintain appropriate and professional standards of dress and decorum in the classroom in keeping with the provisions outlined in the body of this report. The policy is to be presented in a report to the Board of Trustees by March 1st, 2023, with an interim report in February 2023, and I so move.
Thank you so much. And Trustee Baxter, would you like to second that motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
All right. Is there any debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Trustee, okay, and that carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Now, if you can believe it, folks, there was already a dress code for HDSB students. There's even a Halloween costume dress code, but no dress code for staff. This apparently wasn't a problem until Carrie Luke Lemieux, a.k.a. Kayla Lemieux, a.k.a. Busty Lemieux, showed up to shop class at Oakville Trafalgar High School dressed as a grotesque caricature of a woman. Sporting enormous Z-cup breasts with fake nipples protruding through tight tops, Lemieux's clothing and prosthetic boobs were tolerated and, well, perhaps even celebrated by the HDSB as a jolly good example of the board accommodating transgenderism. You know, diversity is our strength and all that jazz. Many parents and students, and even Stephen Lecce, the Ontario Minister of Education, begged to differ, noting that Lemieux's costume was inappropriate and unprofessional.
Yeah, I do continue to believe that the Halton School Board, which is the employer, has an obligation to ensure that these classrooms are safe and respectful places to learn. Teachers need to uphold, as I've noted, the highest standards of professional standards when they're in front of children. And so I do not believe the board administration has done so to date. And I do believe the Ontario College of Teachers corroborated this principle. They said that the board has the necessary authorities to enforce those standards. So I expect them to do so.
Now, for many observers, this idea of the HDSB investigating the viability of a dress code for its teachers might come across as being a case of deja vu all over again. Well, for good reason. After all, a study about implementing a dress code for teachers was already conducted last November. That's when the HDSB trustees actually approved a ludicrous recommendation tabled by Human Resources Superintendent Sari Taha, who stated that implementing a professional dress code and grooming standards would likely expose the board to, quote, considerable liability, end quote. The report also claimed professionalism must be balanced with a culture of respect, equity, and inclusion, and that employers need to allow employees to express themselves according to their, quote, lived gender, end quote.
Now let's talk about the Human Rights Code. It's important to recognize the impact of dress code policy that they have on members of the transgender community. Most notably, it's important for employers to make allowances to ensure that these employees are able to express themselves. So, in closing, again, the board had requested this information from Director Ennis, and I've provided you the key highlights of this report. Not to make any rhetorical statements, it's clear from the analysis that the consideration of a dress code places a great deal of liability and exposure to the board if not done carefully. So that's one lesson or one takeaway from this. And even if a dress code is implemented for non-discriminatory reasons, we implemented in good faith because we thought we had a problem and we properly diagnosed it and we said this is the response to it, it would likely to be found discriminatory where it adversely, which we know it will, affect employees or groups on the basis of their code-protected grounds. Lastly, and this is something I alluded to in my earlier sentence, if we as a board, as the employer, desire to establish a culture that is professional, that's equitable, that's inclusive, that's safe for everyone, and even if the dress code is that instrument, that policy instrument that we choose to design and implement, is non-discriminatory and reasonable, has met every test I talked about, I assure you it will not achieve or less likely to achieve its intended purposes. And otherwise, there are other ways to foster a culture of inclusivity, respect, human rights, and safety for everyone than what I would say an antiquated instrument. The modern day organization does not implement dress codes. They are being descaled. And as I said, they are disproportionately burdensome on not me, but on women and members of the other identity communities. And with that, happy to take any questions.
So in other words, folks, anything goes. If a teacher wants to show up to class in a bathing suit or clad in dominatrix gear or donning a Spider-Man costume, hey, that's all fair dinkum based on, again, quote, a culture of respect, equity, and inclusion, and that employers need to allow employees to express themselves, end quote. But by every measure, this stance by Sari Taha seems preposterous beyond words. Indeed, consider a Financial Post column co-authored by prominent labor lawyers Howard Levitt and Peter Carey. Levitt and Carey essentially provide the HDSB with 5 figures worth of free legal advice. Here's what they had to state, quote, recently, the Halton District School Board has pronounced that it is legally unable to impose a dress code on Lemieux, thereby becoming an international laughingstock. The suggestion is so stupid and contrary to the law that we wonder what motivated it. However, the pronouncement has cowed parents who had been agitating for the board to stop her teaching their children in that attire. Even in a unionized environment, an employer always has the right to ensure that employees are appropriately attired. By appropriately, we mean in a fashion appropriate to the position and which does not alienate customers, other employees, and others with whom they deal. Halton's other legal argument is that it cannot change the terms of employment before the next collective agreement. That is equally nonsensical. Legally, yes, it cannot change wages or benefits or other significant negotiated terms of employment, but Lemieux's idiosyncratic and vulgar method of dress is itself new. More to the point, the management rights clause in every collective agreement permits the employer to require its employees to dress reasonably, and even more so to require that a teacher of young people be a role model for civility and professionalism, not obscenity and vulgarity, end quote. But then again, what does Levitt and Carey know, eh? But regardless, here's the rub. If HDSB Superintendent of Human Resources, Sari Taha, found a dress code for teachers would be discriminatory last November, then why would Taha pivot come this March? As well, the hopelessly woke and incredibly incompetent Director of Education, Curtis Innes, he, him, suggested in a statement last Monday that he would veto a dress code recommendation. Wrote Innes, he, him, quote, "The HDSB's commitment to human rights remains rooted in our core values and commitment to each and every student and staff who identifies as a member of an underserved and underrepresented group, and our approach is informed by opinions from leading employment law firms and human rights and equity advisors. This commitment and approach will continue to be applied as the HDSB looks to fulfill this motion," end quote. Well, as far as I'm concerned, folks, this sounds like Ennis, he, him is getting ready to throw the school board under the bus if he doesn't like the recommendation. Or maybe he's just too committed to wokeism. Then again, there is plenty of blame to go around here. After all, the HDSB continues to be tone deaf and downright arrogant when it comes to addressing this issue with parents. You know, the people who pay their salaries. You see, the HDSB simply won't discuss matters with parents pertaining to Busty Lemieux, even though this wannabe drag queen is receiving press coverage the world over that is making the HDSB come across as an international laughingstock. Indeed, Students First Ontario, which is a parent-student group that was formed to address the Busty Lemieux fiasco, recently requested a parent council meeting. And guess what? The HDSB nixed it because these educrats want nothing to do with transparency in case that comes across as being, well, you know, transphobic. That prompted a letter to the board sent earlier this week from Rashi Bandhu, a lawyer who represents Students First Ontario and a father of a child at Oakville, Trafalgar. Quote, "Miss Newton, I represent Scott Miller and two other parents, as I believe you are aware. I write in reference to your letter of yesterday's date attached. Perhaps you did not see the proposed agenda for the meeting that Mr. Miller is seeking to call. I've attached it to aid the reconsideration of your position. In addition, you should note the following. 1. On December 19th, I sent the board a detailed letter outlining the statutory provisions giving school council advisory rights with respect to any matter. That letter also set out the board's mandatory obligations to consult the school council with respect to policy revisions and to respond to the recommendations of council. Number 2, Minister Lecce heard us. In response, he directed the board, among other things, to listen to the parents. Yet the board continues to attempt to silence parents. It ignored its consultation obligations. You can see the agenda is aimed at establishing a general mandate for council consistent with the Act, establish mandatory bylaws which are not in place, allow parents to voice their legitimate concerns with the board, and create subcommittees to advise the board. Those entitlements are well within the parents' statutory authority. Frankly, if bylaws were in place, there would be no dispute about the proper role of council. It is not clear to me the basis on which you are suggesting that council cannot meet more than the number of times that were initially agreed to. Where in the Act are the number of school council meetings capped? This special meeting is necessary, in part, because the board interfered with earlier ones. The evidence is readily available if you'd like to see it. Kindly reconsider your letter and advise Mr. Miller. If you have specific questions or concerns, he is happy to discuss them. The agenda may be revised as appropriate. However, the board is not going to silence parents. If your position remains the same, kindly confirm that in writing. Otherwise, please advise when the meeting can be held next week and when Mr. Oliver can deliver an agenda in accordance with his statutory obligation, end quote. Well, that's the HDSB for you. They feel they know better. And even though this is a publicly funded school board, this board acts like a tin pot dictatorship. Oh, and by the way, just why is the HDSB so hell-bent when it comes to protecting Busty Lemieux in the first place? Nobody believes that Lemieux is undergoing a genuine male-to-female transition. Not even those in the transgender community believe that. So it's most likely one of two things. Number one, Lemieux is pranking the board to see how far it would go to accommodate him, in which case he might be a hero of sorts. Or maybe it's number two, Lemieux is a sexual pervert. There is much speculation on social media that Lemieux could be suffering from autogenophilia. According to the National Library of Medicine, autogenophilia is defined as, quote, a male's propensity to be sexually aroused by the thought of himself as a female. It is the paraphilia that is theorized to underlie transvestism and some forms of male-to-female transsexualism. Autogenophilia encompasses sexual arousal with cross-dressing and cross-gender expression, end quote. And folks, I'm really leaning toward option number two, perversion. And I say this because, as I previously reported, I was forwarded a photo of Lemieux that allegedly dates back a couple of years ago. Check it out. Now, the person who sent this my way did not want to come on camera. But here's the story. This photo of Lemieux was captured at a Burlington theater that was hosting a private dance recital for little girls. Only the girls and their parents or guardians of the girls were in attendance. Allegedly, during the halftime intermission, Lemieux snuck into the theater and perched himself ringside to watch the little girls dance. Alas, Lemieux is hardly inconspicuous, and some concerned parents eventually asked him to leave. And so this skunk to the garden party did indeed leave. Now, folks, do you find this anecdote as creepy as I do, that this biological man dresses as an unflattering caricature of a female and then takes in a private dance recital involving little girls? Is this part and parcel of autogenophilia? Was Lemieux getting sexually aroused by the girls dancing? It is just so gross. It is so disturbing. It is so despicable. And yet, in this day and age of if it's trans, it's good, and if it's good, it's trans, the HDSB is only concerned about his human rights. Yes, the human rights of someone who might be a sexual pervert are protected, but not the human rights of little children. In summary, this is the person that those who comprise the Halton District School Board are going out of their way to protect, despite enormous pressure from so many stakeholders to put an end to this freak show. Let's see what happens in the weeks ahead regarding that proposed dress code for staff. It should be a no-brainer, but then again, when it comes to Halton, we are dealing with educrats who are seemingly brainless. For Rebel News, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. What is the Halton District School Board hiding when it comes to the infamous Busty Lemieux? Why do they want almost $4,000 to hand over public documents? Well, we're going to call their bluff. We're going to raise that $4,000, and we are going to get our hands on those documents. So, folks, if you can help us, please, go to protectthestudents.ca. That's protectthestudents.ca. Let's see what the Halton District School Board is keeping secret.